Is the bubble about to burst? We're here in the capital of Australia's property growth, Sydney, right in the harbour here. And you know, there's been a lot of talk about, is the market overheated? You know, is there going to be a bust? And I can tell you that the banks are pretty smart and they don't lend up to 90% residential property because they like taking risks. And over the last 100 years, yes, there's been some dips in the property market, but overall, the only way for property is to go up. And also, Australia has got some fundamentals which are not, you know, around the world. Like when you had America, you had the bust in America. It was because the government actually made it so affordable to get a loan that virtually you didn't have to rent because they were giving you loans with no deposit, you know, there was no background checks, no serviceability criteria, and that's why the bust happened. Whereas in Australia, our fundamentals are much more secure. So remember, when is the best time to get into property? Well, it was 20 years ago. Because how would you like to buy a property for what, you know, your neighbor's property for what they paid for it 20 years ago? We all would, right? So when people talking about busts, right, usually they're talking about a dip in the market. Like Sydney is still going up. It's been 4 or 5 years and now it's slowed down, but there's still pockets of Sydney, around Sydney, where the market is still catching up with the rest of the growth that's happened around Sydney. And you'll find places like Brisbane, Gold Coast, you know, some of the other cities, Melbourne, they're still going because overall the market tends to move up, you know, in different levels. So if Sydney's already gone up, Melbourne might start to follow, then Brisbane, you know, then you got the other, you know, regional centers like Canberra and Hobart. So there is always opportunities in property. And remember, 80% of Australian millionaires were created through property. It was because their property went up over time. But it is not an accident that, you know, so many people become wealthy through property. So when you hear the doom and gloom experts, they're usually trying to sell their next book about the next crash. But the reality is that investing in property is one of the best decisions if you follow the basic criteria, you know, that we teach in some of our other videos. Things like choosing the right area, you know, making sure that there's population growth, making sure that there is a underlying demand for properties in that area. Right? So as long as you got the basics right, you shouldn't see a property like completely busting. And I'm not talking about the upper end of the market. Obviously the properties that are, you know, priced at tens of millions or millions of dollars, they are affected differently. But the median price properties we're talking about, right, they're a pretty safe investment. And there's a reason why we said it's as safe as houses, because property is probably one of the least risky investments that you can make. So don't worry about the boom and bust. Just make sure that you pick the right areas and invest today.